One of the requirements for reality shifting, in my opinion, is the necessity to be able to take different perspectives and to practice cognitive flexibility. And really, what this means is that you are able to dance around different constructs of interpretations of the world. I like to think about driving and people who have road rage. And I don't mean to pick on you if you have road rage, but it's kind of a cliche example that we all kind of know somebody that when they get in the car, they're like a weapon, right? And their anger, they can just like pop off. Okay, maybe not all of us know somebody like this, but I personally was in the passenger seat of somebody like this, and it was terrifying because this particular person always saw insults. Everything was against them, including things that had nothing to do with them, right? It was like a truck slams on his brakes in front of us, and the driver of this car flips out because the driver of the car, in their interpretation, in their mind, the person in front of them is purposefully trying to make their life difficult, trying to keep them on their toes. When, in my interpretation, it appeared that the truck was oblivious to what was happening behind him and was actually responding to something in front of him. Meaning he was reacting to having to stop really fast because he was caught off guard. And that created a chain reaction that actually had nothing to do with who was behind him and trying to make that person's day miserable. But people that have a victim narrative going and have cognitive inflexibility have one singular mindset, which in my opinion makes them quite dangerous. And so as I was riding with this particular person who just lost it, you would not believe what they did. They quickly veered to the left, put the foot all the way on the accelerator, and this was on a road that had a light, and we were coming up on a light, and they like zoomed in front of the truck, which was this really big truck that had like some sort of liquid in the back, so its ability to start and stop was kind of delayed, right? And they cut in front of that truck and like cut the space off that the truck was leaving after like everything settled down and we were all like going again. And then that truck almost rear-ended us. And then I lost it because I was like, what are you doing? But they were so enraged that they then threatened the safety of multiple people because they felt that they were personally attacked. They could not see the situation any other way. And I find that there are a subset of people that demonstrate psychology like this. And it's quite terrifying, actually. It's really terrifying because they're living in a construct in their minds where there is only one explanation for things, and God forbid you're the reason, right? Because when people are inflexible and they only see it through the lens of their bias or the lens of their wounds, but they don't know that they're viewing things from the lens of their wounds because they haven't opened up to this process of self-mastery and self-discovery, then they're looking at everybody else and holding them responsible for their faulty perceptions. And this gets to one of the main teachings of reality shifting, which is you have to be able to perceive the same set of stimuli, the same world, in at least two different ways. Otherwise, you're never going to shift. And there are some other barriers to shifting, like being heavily tied to space and time, that we'll talk about later. But if you only see the world one way, I don't advise trying to reality shift because it's not going to work for you, you know? It's just not going to happen. And it might be like a cool idea and something to try out, but until you master the perspective shift and taking different angles and different perspectives, then it's just, it's a lost cause. I want to say it's a lost cause because it is. It actually is. And so now let's talk about those of you that naturally can take many different perspectives. The way that you'll know this is that if you have a very strong ability to empathize and put yourself in other people's shoes, and then you can see things from their perspective and from your perspective, which probably makes you really great in conflict and really good at diffusing conflict, but also perhaps a little beaten up on, and maybe the one that is always having to heal things or to take the lead in solving relationship problems because you might be more advanced than the people that you are partnered up with. And so they're kind of stuck in their perspective, and you're the one that's always having to hold their hand through it and to guide the conflict to resolution or to diffuse things. And so you might be a peacekeeper. You might be a mediator. Your friends might look to you as the go-to person to help solve their problems, especially with other people. You might also have formal training in being an attorney. Attorneys are great at this. Or a scientist. This is part of the formal training of being a scientist. I have this data. I saw this result or these results, and I have these data. Let's just keep it all consistent. And these are my interpretations, but I have another set of interpretations given these other factors and these other research papers. And scientists are trained to never prove anything. We always leave room for an alternative explanation that we just don't have the proper technology or tools to be able to elucidate at that time. And so if you have training in fields like this, then you are going to be naturally well set up. And there are other fields as well, being an artist, for example, and being able to, like I'm thinking of, create abstract art or still art, or to take an image and transmute it, like literally even photography, like being able to see things that aren't there, right? It's not just like looking at things from one literal perspective. And so the ability for the eyes to pull in different features. Another great example is if you go outside and you look up at the clouds and you see shapes or animals, or, you know, like faces is a big thing. You go hiking and you see faces in bushes and trees. And this is evidence that you have the ability to see the world in a variety of different ways. And that is practicing cognitive flexibility. And so what then you can do is that whatever running narrative you have about your baseline reality, you can then use that as a superpower to your advantage to craft a different narrative, an alternative explanation for the same series of events, which helps you to pull in different worlds. And so that's why it's fundamentally important that you're able to see things from different perspectives and have different interpretations, because then you can actually take a storyline that you have that you don't like, especially if you're in a nightmare realm. This is one of the fundamental processes for manifesting your way out, is that you have to take the narrative that has been given to you at first, and you have to repurpose it in a way that makes sense to you. This is a process of transmutation, or a process of alchemy, where you take coal and you turn it into something else. And you take a metal and you turn it into a precious metal. And so that process requires you to look at the same foundational events that have trapped you or that are not delivering the results that you want, and then you repurpose it. And the way you repurpose it is going to be very unique to you as an individual, but this is where being a writer or a creative comes in very handy, because then you can actually create and craft a new narrative out of the circumstances. The origin story is what I call it. The circumstances that you originally had, you can completely transform. And depending on how much you're trying to transform it, that could take a lot of time. It could take a lot of iterations, because as I mentioned in a couple of other recordings, you can't just wake up one day and say, I'm embarking on a new life. You have to navigate through it. And this is part of the work that we do with the one-on-one coaching. And so, but you can do it on your own. And so you have to turn the needle and turn the dial. And the best way to do that is to go through a series of storylines that make sense to you. And so let's just imagine that you are in a nightmare realm and you have voice to skull technology and operators. You're at a little disadvantage because you have external stimuli that is imposed on you that then creates a sensory experience that already has a nightmare narrative. Otherwise, you wouldn't identify as being in a nightmare, right? And so you're at a disadvantage than somebody who is trying to find the purpose or trying to embark on a new life path, but their life is fundamentally okay. They don't have the pressure points that you do. And this means that it might be harder for you to rewrite the story, because you effectively have to rewrite the sensory information, and you have to rewrite the motives of the people that are oppressing you or putting you in a nightmare. And then you have to have a hero comeback story. And that is it's a little more complicated. I'm not gonna spin it any other way. It's doable, but it's hard. It's challenging. You have to be very, very dedicated. And that's why finding your voice, finding your power, finding your drive, and turning yourself into the transmutated precious metal is the best approach. And there's that whole saying that diamonds aren't formed without pressure. And so you have to become a diamond, and you have to welcome that pressure and turn it into your heroic story. Versus if you are just trying to explore and shift destiny lines, then you might not have the pain points that somebody in a nightmare place does. But you can still follow the same process. And when you follow the same process, it should happen easier for you, except if you're not dedicated to it, because if you're not really motivated to change, then there is a degree of intent and dedication and persistence that I believe is helpful. It's not required, but I believe is helpful for reality shifting. You can't just be like on a Tuesday, a random Tuesday, be like, yeah, I think I'm just going to try out some reality shifting before I go to work. It's a whole system of rewiring your nervous system, your perceptual experience, and the way you process information. And so it's not just something you could pick up like a random hobby. It's more like an intramural sport that you might play and try to get really, really good at, and maybe obsess with it for a while and try out different forms. Like that's the way to do reality shifting, is to like really dedicate some concentrated energy. And so on paper, or whatever your preferred method is of journaling or recording things. I started doing voice notes to myself using an app that I really like called Journey. I recommend it to so many people. No, it's not a sponsored thing. I just love it that much. I seriously just tell everybody almost about it. What I like about it is that you're able to record yourself, and it's like a diary. You can also upload video and photos. I promise it's not an ad. And I've used it for literally years, absolutely years. And I did that as a way to rewrite my narratives. And what you'll find is that over time, it rewrites the way you see the world, because you're crafting a new storyline, and then that feeds back into your perception. And then when you find something that affirms that storyline, then it's like, oh my God, it's working, game time. And then that creates momentum. And then you start to see the world start to change too. But if you don't have the cognitive flexibility and you're just in a straight line, then you're probably not listening to this, honestly. You're probably not listening. So it's to your benefit to explore the different possibilities and to write stories, to share the different interpretations. There is power in speaking. There is power in using our words. And the structure of our thought is very much reflected in how we speak. And so you can pull in a new reality layer just by talking, especially once you have the hang of it. And it is that easy. I kid you not. It's like people say it's in the Bible, like God said there was, and there was. And it's that same sort of principle, whatever your religious belief is. And I am a believer in cymatics, and that the universe is made up of frequencies and vibration. And literally you can see it with sacred geometry, that certain frequencies and sounds will move matter in certain arrangements, and really beautiful arrangements. And using our voice and the power of our words is no different. Because especially when we're talking to other people, even just ourselves, even out loud to the universe, it's like the universe responds to us. It's a sentient, living being somehow, and I don't know how that is, but I spent hours recording myself just talking alone, not even to a cat, or a dog, just talking out loud. And I could feel that the universe responded. And sometimes I could feel that I had listeners on the line and I could feel their reactions. But that's this whole other side plot. And so by practicing different interpretations, you can harness this ability to pull in different worlds. And one exercise that I like to do and that I like to recommend to people, especially if you have a negative event, is to interpret it in 3 different ways. So you have the negative event and your initial interpretation. And very often, for a lot of people, that is the victim interpretation. Something is happening to you. That person did something to you. And that is a position of powerlessness that then causes you to have an emotional reaction that is low vibration, right? And so that feeds into, at least this is the theory, and this is, a lot of people talk about this. I'm still on the fence about how much this is actually true and how much it actually works this way, but this is like the mainstream idea about how this works. When you have a low vibration, this feeds into attaching yourself to a reality layer that is also of that vibration for you to work through that lesson or that mirroring. And so if you are always having something done to you, if you are always being targeted, if you are always a victim, then you have a powerless narrative that you have to overcome. And the universe is going to reinforce that message over and over and over again until you finally overcome it. And so, by then practicing two other alternative explanations, like the person in front of you who cut you off had an emergency call and dropped their phone and swerved, and then by the time that they tried to, like, you literally just create a story, right? Where you are not the victim, you're just a bystander. And so that person's action, yes, it affected you, and yes, you had stress and you had to respond, but it actually was not intended to hurt you. It was not intended to upset you or to put you in a precarious position. That's probably more accurate most of the time. And then you want to have another alternative explanation. And this is where things can get really interesting, because I like to do it positive, negative, neutral. And so now how do we take that example and turn it into something positive? It takes a little bit of stretch when it comes to like road situations, right? But let's say that your higher self or your guides wanted to test your fitness and your reaction time and your reaction skills, and demonstrate to you that you are a very highly competent driver, to reinforce your self-esteem. I'm not really a big fan of this, but I'm thinking on my feet here. And so you have an opportunity to shine. And we can even take out the higher self guides part, because that is kind of still a powerless situation. And I like it to be autonomous. So you get to see for yourself how good your reflexes actually are. And that builds a mental image for you of how competent you are, which then helps you to navigate through road obstacles even better, with more confidence, with more ease, with more grace, and sets you up to where when you're really in a tight situation, you'll know exactly what to do because your reflexes are already primed and practiced. Like, there was a story of my dad, actually, and I wasn't with the family at this time. I was the oldest, am the oldest, they're still alive. But they were on like a family vacation and were driving down a highway, and there was a semi-truck, 18-wheeler, that tried to, they were in the left lane and the truck was in the middle lane, and the truck tried to merge. They didn't see him. I guess they were driving in the blind spot. So it pushed the minivan with my entire family into the shoulder, which was very scary because I have this vision, although I don't know if this is actually true, of there being like an overpass and the lane getting very narrow. And so my dad had to do this crazy maneuver in a minivan full of people that he was able to do without getting squished. And so that's like one of those heroic moments that, let's say that there was a driving incident 2 months beforehand that actually prepared him to do that, that kept his reflexes really sharp. That would be a positive interpretation, because I do believe that there is a little bit of chaos in the world and accidents do happen. And we do need to have our fitness primed, and we do need to exercise that sometimes. And it's kind of a silly example, but by casting yourself in different narrative streams, especially when you're trying to transmute something, you then pull in an affirming reality that will echo that over time. So what I found really interesting before we close is that person that I referenced being in the car with had this default reality modality that was very counter to my own. Like they just always felt that they were being stolen from and that people were trying to take advantage of them. And we would literally be observing the same situation, but would have a completely different take on it. And I found that that really repelled me because I was like, I don't want to be sharing this reality with you. It's pretty dark and horrific. But I also found out that they themselves, this is the craziest thing, they themselves obsessively thought about how to take advantage of people and to steal from people. Isn't that interesting? And so naturally, they saw that everybody else was doing that to them. Thank God I took the exit ramp on that one because I can't imagine what karma they're going to get ensnared in. You know, they probably see it coming. They probably feel it coming. And so that's why they're suspicious of everybody because they themselves do that. And so their reality that they're creating, and they're a powerful manifester, and it's crazy because they know this too. They actually are cognizant of their manifesting abilities. And the reality that they are manifesting is really unsavory. And so I just leave you with that to say that be very mindful of your close associations because you are co-opted into creating realities with other people as well and shifting in and out of realities. And it's far better to be on your own for a while if at first you're magnetizing people that are trying to pull you into hell-like nightmare realms. And if you're in a hell-like nightmare realm and you want to get out, please email me. Let's talk, because you don't have to stay there. With that in mind, if you want to work one-on-one, please let me know. And the way I do it is through asynchronous WhatsApp, meaning we talk when we're available. It's usually a couple times a day. And that's if we're doing the week-long intensive, or I do it on a session-by-session basis, depending on your case. But email me and let me know. At the very least, I can give you some words of encouragement or advice, or maybe connect you with some people who I think might be able to help, or we could just be friends. So with that, we'll talk next time.